Hey. Hello and welcome to the Endless Possibilities podcast. My name is Gareth and this is episode 31. I'm joined today by my good friend and co-host Eva. Hello, Eva.
Hi, Gareth.
Hello. Today we have a very special guest on the show. His name is Davidya Buckland, and he is the author of this great book, Our Natural Potential. Hello, David. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Hi, David.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're so happy
Yeah.
to have you on our podcast. And Gareth just showed this book. I have this book as well. I got this about 3 years ago when I went through the levels of consciousness, and I was just before shifting into unity. And then actually Gareth recommended this book to me, and I got it, and it was very helpful to know, where I'm at, to understand it better, and then what's in front of me, kind of. So that was really, really helpful. Yeah.
Yeah,
Great
I had a
book.
similar thing happen with my process there. It was a conversation that Ajashanti had with Locke Kelly, and they talked about what was just ahead, and so that gave me some clarity, and it actually helped facilitate the process.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a fabulous book, and I've actually recommended that to so many people over the last 4 years. Actually, yeah, actually last night it was strange on my group where we talk. There was quite a large group, and the topic of the book came up, and I actually put like a kind of a link to it on my website because I was constantly being asked about it. So it's like, oh, it's on this page. You can go and you can find it because there's so many. It makes the understanding of the levels as people are going through them so much easier to understand, from the way you write about them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And especially, for example, English is not my first language, right? So,
Oh, yeah.
and it's like, it was, even for me, it was easy to understand, it's
Yeah.
simple but profound. So that's why I really liked it, because other books, there's just so much information there. It's simple and profound. Yeah. It was really, really easy to understand. So I really enjoyed it. And,
That's great.
yeah, got a lot from it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So David, do you want to give us a little bit of background just on your
Okay.
story and what got you to here?
Okay, just briefly, I went through a phase when I was, I guess, late teens, got interested in how the brain works, and left brain, right brain stuff and all that. And that led to the topic of consciousness. And so I was reading about that. And of course, then the topic of meditation comes up, which I knew nothing about at the time. And then I saw a poster for transcendental meditation, and so I thought, well, I'll go to a talk and see what it's about. And I ended up learning, and had my first transcending or samadhi experience. It was pretty foggy, really, but it was a very different sort of experience. So I got hooked basically, and became avid. And they had, at the time, they if you wanted to get more of the knowledge, there was some classes and things, but at a certain point you had to go on to teacher training to learn to teach TM. And so I went to a course. It was about 9 months after I started in Europe. They used off-season hotels in those days, and spent 6 months in basically a 6-month retreat where I also was learning to teach it, and going into the deeper knowledge that Maharishi taught behind all that.
How old were you at that time? Just
I was about 20, I think, 19
okay.
in there.
Quite young, yeah.
Yeah. So I came back and taught a few people, but it was never really supported, particularly at the time. Looking back now, I recognize the karmic dynamics and so on like that behind that. But at the time, it was sort of like I thought it would be this great career sort of thing to be spiritual, but also to be supporting others in their spiritual path. But as I say, it wasn't really supported. But one of the key things that happened for me during the retreat was that, I did a lot of purification during the first half. And then roughly about the halfway point, there was a shift where the self woke up. But now the key part here is the distinction between the self waking up and the self waking up to itself. Like cosmic consciousness or self-realization, as it's more commonly called, is when the self wakes up to itself. And so there's one of the things that meditation practices do is cultures that the inner awakeness of the self, so then it can see itself and wake up. But there is a stage just before that that can happen sometimes for people. It's not common, but it's not, it's not rare, where the self wakes up, but the ego remains identified. So it doesn't wake up to itself, it just becomes awake. And this is known as the observer or the witness, where essentially you take a step back and your awareness kind of sits behind a little bit, watching your thinking and your emotions and your body acting and so on like that. Now, this wasn't what the teaching said. It was characteristic of like one of the characteristics of the self being awake, the witness, is that you're awake 24/7. So when you go to sleep at night, you watch the body fall asleep, and you kind of go into, it's kind of like going into a meditation, because there's no content once the mind goes to sleep. It's just silence, and then when dreams come up, there's a bit more, the mind wakes up and there's kind of like stuff going on, and at first I was hyper vigilant and I was changing my dreams and experimenting with what, discovering I couldn't remove my body when I was in deep sleep, and this kind of thing. But I kind of realized at a certain point that if I was doing that stuff, then the mind was still awake, which wasn't really proper sleep yet.
Was that lucid dreaming, David?
It's like lucid dreaming, but it's the self itself that's witnessing, as opposed to mind, because you can have a place where the mind is awake in dreaming.
So just to quickly, like when you lucid dream, you are the character in the dream, right? But what you're talking about is sort of like witnessing the dream from a third party, right?
And being able to control the character if you want to. But as I mentioned, to me, the experience for me here is that dreams are kind of a way to process the day's stuff and whatever's coming up to be processed. It's like taking out the trash, and so stopping to open the garbage bag and look inside is it's a waste of time. So I kind of put it aside and just allowed it to continue. But that basically it was permanent from thereafter. And then about 10 days later, I guess, on the retreat, I was doing yoga asana on the floor, and was face down at the time, and I had what's known as makara. Actually, I think I've got this backwards. I think makara came first, and then the witness was thereafter. Yeah, the witness was thereafter. So there's a point just above the third eye known as makara, and it's kind of like this drop of divinity, and everything just blows out with white light, and it's totally overwhelms all perception. And as perception came back again a few moments later, I could see through the floor and the wall of the room below me out onto the grounds. It was it was kind of one of those like, whoa. But then it kind of faded really quickly, and then I sat to meditate, and then as I got back up into activity afterwards, I realized that I was witnessing, and it was thereafter. I mean, I had a couple of sporadic things where for an hour or two I was witnessing earlier, but it was coming and going. But after makara, it was ongoing. And then about 10 days later, what actually happened about 10 days later is I had my first what's called a cognition. Now, cognitions are not everybody can realize, but not everybody can cognize. It's a skill kind of a thing or something. And there's different levels of cognition. I talk about it on my blog. So different people can have that are cognizers can have different levels of seers, whatever you want to call them, different levels of it. But essentially, it's an experience where it's like a big download where the totality of the experience comes in all at once. And so you know the object from all sides, from its entire history, its origins, the whole thing. It all just comes in at a big dump. And then, for me, this was the structure of the universe, what's called Pranyagarbha, or the golden egg. And it took a number of months for that to be, processed by the mind. So I understood what it was, was able to process that experience. So a lot happened on teacher training, and then I came back into the world, attempting to teach and not being very successful at it, and then kind of trying to figure out how to support myself and so on like that.
David, did you relay any of these experiences to the teachers when you were there?
Yes, at the end of our course, I was able to talk to Maharishi, and he verified all the experiences and said there'd be much more, which was kind of an understatement. But once I was back in the field, I didn't have any access to that, and it kind of stirred things up a little bit for people, because I was witnessing full time, which is supposed to be a symptom of awakening, but I wasn't awake. But some people thought I was making a claim that I was awake, and even though I never said that, I was a bit naive, and so I wasn't being very careful to be clear about what was going on. I mean, I wasn't that clear myself yet, but it became clear, fairly quickly, over some months. And then, having, experiences of what's known as the celestial, or that fine level of, or causal, where that fine level where the world is just starting to become, also called the bliss body. That was considered a GC, or God consciousness type experience, the second stage. So some people saw me as making these claims to being in God consciousness and stuff like that, which was not. And there was also people gossiping about it, because there was other people that from my city on my course who came back and said these things to people, and so then they thought I was making the claims, and that kind of politics. And again, that was just the way.
Oh, it sounds like politics, yeah.
Yeah, the way they're calling the karma was playing out for me. And so and there was desire to go back on more courses and stuff, but what I really needed was lots of grounding and integration. So kind of did the Siddhartha thing, where real strong spiritual focus, and then a shift more into an outward stroke, so to speak. And I started a career and got married and had kids and all that kind of thing. So spiritual, I continued to meditate and that kind of thing. There was lots of experiences, but it kind of was more in the background for a while. And then skipping ahead, I heard through friends about Lorn Hoff. You mentioned him in your book, Gareth. And at the time, he was only doing local satsangs in a different city, and wasn't available to me. But then they started doing stuff on Skype. It was kind of this daisy chain thing where we're connecting, connecting these hubs, which would connect to other people, and we tried to, gather in groups to listen and so on. And I woke up listening to him on one of those calls, just that the awake self in him stirred the self here to see itself. And there are certainly people who wake up on their own, but the majority of people I've seen, they shift when with a catalyst, basically, when they're exposed to someone awake. The awakeness in them sees what it is, basically, and shift can happen. Sometimes
He has a very He has a
Sorry?
unique gift of stirring that aliveness with his voice.
Yes,
So
he
like
does.
Eva and I, we both downloaded a lot of Lorn's audios that he has on his website. And I mean, the quality is really, really bad. Like they must be like 15 years old, right? But
Some
there
of them
was
are
still a
going,
beautiful transmission in them. There was
oh
still,
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, on the early days, he was living in a farmhouse in the middle of the prairies, so in the middle of nowhere, and he was calling on his cell phone to connect with this other guy who was on Skype. And so, the half the time you couldn't even hear him with the buzzing, and he was speaking really
Yeah.
quietly and all this, but it didn't matter. No,
I
it
didn't
didn't actually
remember.
have to hear him. The transmission was what was important.
Yeah. Yeah, it was so
Yeah.
funny because we were joking when we listened to the audios. There was like a fan in the background and planes flying and birds tweeting and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I can totally relate because just I was on the edge of the shift to unity, and I was listening to his stuff constantly because I knew there was just something missing. And him pointing towards the silence and towards the self just helped me to surrender into that. So I'm sure it was his recordings what gave me the last push to have that shift. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's the same. I can sense so many people are so close to shifts, like either, self-realization or unity. And I say
Yeah.
to them, you're there. Go and listen to Lorn's
Yeah.
audios, right? Because it just needs that little click just to it's like the
Yeah.
spark
The,
that's
the
needed.
catalyst. Yeah. The catalyst.
Mm.
Yeah.
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 Exactly. Yeah. 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 For me, I woke up, and about 2 months later, I had the God consciousness shift where it shifted into this mode of the heart woke up. It's kind of like there's the Kundalini rises up through the chakras to the crown and awakening. It's like Shakti rises to join Shiva, and then the two descend together. And when it reaches the heart, it's kind of like a higher octave version of the heart that wakes up, and universal love and compassion. And I mean, this is the way I frame it. But it's just this, outpouring of this flow of love and all this kind of stuff, and refined perception and that kind of stuff. It really kicked in a lot. And then about 2 months after that, I had the unity shift, where the self is awake as the observer, and you start to become aware that the world itself around you, sometimes through the God consciousness process, but the world around you is also playing out on a screen of consciousness. And then with unity, there's a recognition that the consciousness that's behind the world of experience is the same consciousness as the observer. So essentially the observer and the observed come together into one wholeness. And again, that's
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a quick question. What you mentioned before about the God consciousness. So the Kundalini goes up into the brain and back into the heart. So is this something that needs to happen to experience God consciousness, or
Well, God
yeah, does
consciousness
it go
is
hand in hand?
fundamentally about the refined perception and the awakening heart. Now, people can get refined perception without a full God consciousness. I mean, in fact, the God consciousness process can start well before awakening, or for some people, it starts much later.
Mm.
It's not necessary to have a God consciousness phase for unity, because the self-realization, unity, and the Brahman stage coming up, those are essentially shifts in our relationship with consciousness. That there's the observer, then the observed, and then we transcend consciousness in Brahman. And those are a process. We could say the Shiva side or the consciousness side. And then there's a refinement process that's more the Shakti side, more the feminine process, which is based about refined perception and the heart. And where self-realization, unity, and so on start with a shift in our relationship with consciousness. The refinement stages are a climactic, that they build to a climax.
Progressive, yeah.
Realization, yeah. So there's kind of like a masculine and feminine processes in there, and some people have more of the masculine and some people have more of the feminine. And it's the ideal is a balance, but it is whatever it is. And it's also useful to mention that prior life development of those two carries forward into this life, which is why people can kind of go along for a while, work out some karma, and then their spiritual stuff kicks in from their prior life, and all of a sudden they're waking up and making all kinds of progress. So you get people who meditate, like for me, I've been meditating like 49 years or something now, and it took 30 of those to to wake up. And then you have other people who come along, they go to a few talks, they learn to meditate, and suddenly they're awake. And that points to prior life development. Of course, there's other reasons why that might be there, need of the time and so on. But that's one of the bigger influences. And so the refined stage is also right on top of the other stage. So you have a God consciousness stage, and then you've got the refined version of unity and refined version of Brahman kind of thing. And then in Para-Brahman at the top of it, they kind of come together now, but we'll get to that in a sec.
Sure.
So yeah, so I was in unity for I guess for about 3 years. Unity is a kind of is one of the, I mean, there tends to be a process with every shift, the initial shift and the high contrast, and you kind of settle into it. Like one of the things that often surprises people when they wake up is how normal and ordinary it is, and how, like, why didn't I get this sooner? It's so simple. It's the simplest thing. But there's a lost track of what I was going to say there. Just a moment. So there's that process of unfolding. Now, where am I going here? Mine goes offline.
This happens a lot to us too.
This happens to me
This
all the
happens
time,
all the
David.
time.
I'm glad it's not just me. Me
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Eva, we were doing a live talk, and mid-sentence, people asking me a question, I would forget what they were asking, and I just sit there completely blank.
Yeah.
You know, and everyone thought it was so hilarious, laughing at me.
Yeah, that happened to me in my talks at the Science and Non-Duality Conference. One guy actually gave me his questions on his phone so I could read them and look at them as I went through it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so anyways, was in Unity. Oh yeah, Unity is one of the stages where there's stages that are more obvious. That there's kind of, in the Vedas, they kind of define a bunch of stages, but they're kind of, it's not really that tidy for most people. But essentially, there's that initial shift where we recognize the self, the subject and object are one, and they come together. But then there's all the layers of experience. So there's basically, you put your attention on something and you recognize, oh, I'm that too, and on that, oh, I'm that too, and it kind of gathers together. The Brahma Sutra talks about it as the aggregate. You get this growing wholeness. Where it's kind of gathering things together, and then it starts to go out into, as the Vedas describe it, out into the universe beyond perception, and back through your memories, all your past and potential future, and it's all kind of merged together into this one wholeness. And in the perfect process, it kind of goes up, and it climaxes with refined unity, where you recognize the self is aware of itself globally and at every point within itself. And when that's seen fully, it's, this is the way it unfolded here. But I'm a little more analytical and stuff than most people. Don't need to go into these details. But for here, there was a shift from basically looking in on itself, the self always looking on itself, to kind of turning and looking beyond itself, realizing that because in self-realization and unity, we experience consciousness as infinite and eternal. So there is no more. This is it. This is the reality. And then you kind of turn and look beyond that, and you discover there's this. You go from everything everywhere to nowhere, nothing, to Brahman, which means the great. And it's called the Great Awakening. And essentially you wake up from your enlightenment.
Yeah.
You wake up
The
from
enlightenment falls away
into Brahman, and it's kind of like this complete flip of being intimate with
just one question. Yeah, one question. So the self has to be fully integrated, or the unity has to be fully integrated, so the self has to fully know itself in all aspects, right? And this has to be before the Brahman shift. It has to be finished.
Well, it has to be finished to some value. I mean, there has to be enough for that recognition to take place. I mean, Gareth, you mentioned having a Brahman experience prior to
unity. To unity.
I know a few people who've gone through the unity process, and they come to the edge of Brahman and they kind of backed off because
they get scared.
Because it's such a when you first wake up, some people experience it like stepping off a cliff. You kind of have to just allow
a near-death experience.
Yeah, and it's not, nothing is actually lost, and in fact everything is gained, but it can feel like something's being lost. because the ego is really kind of
Mm.
holding on for dear life there. It doesn't want to let go. And
Yeah.
it kind of, like one of the things I noticed prior to awakening was the ego would kind of throw up these distractions. I'd start to surrender really deeply, and there'd be a really itchy leg, or it would start going la la
Yeah.
la 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 with the mind, you know, or something like that, you know, trying to distract you from you know, being the trickster. I also noticed it would sometimes do these things where it would create a drama, uh, like it would use memories of spiritual experiences to create an apparent conflict between the self and itself. And it's like, oh, and so at the time I was kind of, how am I ever going to see through this? But basically, just the self just needed to get loud enough that it just washed all that away. It wasn't
It kind
relevant.
of gives up after a while, David, doesn't it? It kind of just becomes like that nagging kid that's looking for, you know,
Yeah, well, mine
it's
didn't really
following
give
its.
up.
It
Mine
didn't
didn't
know.
really give
Mine
it up,
did.
but it just got overshadowed. But some people do go through that process. They kind of like one of the things that's not uncommon is for people to go through a giving up, where they're trying to seek, they've been trying to become enlightened, you know, they really want it, and they finally just give up. It's not working, and then that's when they shift, because there's no longer, because it was the ego driving that bus, wanting something
Yeah.
more. Yeah.
Mm.
So with
Yeah,
the Brahman,
and
because
this
I've seen people,
did,
several
yeah.
people go from awakening
Nice.
through Brahman in like less than 6 months. So the process can happen much faster. You know, from my perspective, it's nice if it's a little slower, because then you get more time to, you know, get to know each stage. You can support others more when you know the stages than if you fly through them. But you know, everybody's process is what it is.
Mm.
Eva, did you
Okay,
want to say
very
something?
interesting. No, I just wanted to say before about the self fully knowing itself, because I think you read it, it's written in your book or somewhere on your blog that
Yeah.
it takes a certain time. And I kind of was waiting for that. You know, I was waiting for that the self is fully knows itself, or it's fully integrated. The unity is fully integrated, and then I got the information. Now it's fully integrated, and then I knew, okay, I'm ready for the
Okay.
next step. So then
Oh,
I was
interesting. Yeah.
open, and yeah, then I was open for it. Then I just knew, okay, the next step can unfold now. And then it took like
Yeah.
3 months, and then the Brahmin came. So
Oh,
yeah, so that
interesting.
was
Yeah.
very helpful. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's kind of, yeah, I guess you could say for me, it happened in a certain way, but how that's going to happen for other people is going to vary a lot, how that recognition takes place or how that integrates. But yeah, there has to be the platform for it. And yeah, and the thing about Brahman, because it's beyond consciousness, it it's not experienced. You know it by being it. So you have the shift to Brahman, and then at first, what you tend to notice is what's gone, the loss of the intimacy and the wholeness of unity, and then over time, there, especially if there's a refinement process that makes it a bit easier, you become aware of what is there, and it's not something. It's still nothing, but it's sort of like the qualities, and then further in, you kind of you start to notice qualities like what I call alertness and liveliness and intelligence and that, which are what combine to create consciousness in the first place. Not as a point in time, but just as a process. And and then what I found here was that those qualities, kind of digging deeper a little bit and recognizing those were actually not part of Brahman, but rather they were qualities of divinity. And then so the refinement process kind of takes you into what's known as para-Brahman or pure divinity. Just like you experience pure consciousness or being the Atman self, with awakening, consciousness by itself without content. Here you've got divinity by itself without expression. And again, it's not something you experience; it's something you know by being.
So it's
Although,
experience in itself through your form, right? It's
well,
not the individual having an
there
experience.
is experiences on the level of form and expression, like the experience of being filled with white light and having it pouring in
Yeah.
and feeling those kind of things. But those are on the level of experience. But pure divinity itself, knowing divinity itself, is something you know through being it.
Yeah.
And of course, being Brahman and being pure divinity, you've got the experience of doing that through the unity process. It's prepared for you for that. You know, like one of the things I found in the unity process was that there was these constant little shifts, and it was kind of like I started asking myself, what's real today? Because each day there would be kind of some little differences in my relationship with the world and the process of experience. It's a whole process. And so, but para-Brahman isn't really possible unless there's a refinement process taking place to some degree, because it's basically the climax of there's kind of like the climax of God realization, which is usually prior to Brahman, and then there's the climax of para-Brahman.
So a refinement in Brahman, right?
Yeah, no, it's kind of a funny thing to say refinement in Brahman when there's nothing there, but it's sort of like I'm not even sure how to describe it.
So David,
There's
I had that.
There's an increased knowingness. Yeah.
So I had that refinement coming in, and I confused that for para-Brahman or pure divinity. So I was like, oh, you know, it feels like I'm back. Things are starting to warm up a little bit. Love is starting to come back in. And I was like, this must be the para-Brahman part of it coming in. But
Right,
it
right.
wasn't, right? Because I really knew about it when the pure divinity started flowing. It was like crushing me, coming
Yeah,
in. I couldn't stop it. I was like, you know, I was going, you know, praise, and my head was going from side to side as it was flowing in and filling me up. And then
yeah,
I was like, oh, this is it. This is
yeah.
really it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's so much more. You know, and I've had people refer to God consciousness stuff as para-Brahman and or pure divinity and that.
Yeah.
And you can see you have some experience of God relative to where you've been. It seems like, you know, pure divinity, but no, it's just the beginning. You're just getting to know God through form
Yeah.
or God through feeling. You know, that's just the very, very edges of it. Yeah, it's yeah, so much more. Yeah, there's a in the Bhagavad Gita, the Song of God. There's a scene in chapter 11 where Arjuna is asking Krishna to show him his true form, and because Krishna is there in
Right.
a type body, um, and he finally Krishna finally agrees, and you know Arjuna is basically overwhelmed. Um, I've had the experience, and it wasn't at the time it came to me in a natural way, and so it wasn't quite so overwhelming. But it's pretty intense to know you know, all the forms of God all at once, kind of a thing. There's a lot of experiences like that are possible, but those kind of
Mm.
you get a sense of, you know, people talk about the truth and that kind of thing, but you know, humans are designed to experience one thing at a time. It can be a really big thing, but it's still one thing. And we kind of go through this progressive, uh, Buckminster Fuller calls it special case. Um, but it's basically in our nature, because essentially I mentioned before about consciousness knowing itself globally in every point. Well, our jiva value, the soul, however you want to call it, is the point value that's experiencing through this specific perspective, through this body mind, through these laws of nature. We're adding our perspective to the whole, going through our experiencing through this set of filters or whatever, this perspective. And it's all of us together that create the whole. And but even the wholeness of consciousness is not the completeness of divinity. It's like,
It's limited coming through our body mind, right? The
yeah,
nervous system.
yeah,
There's only so much it can know of itself through our
yeah.
limitations.
Like the three of us, each of us have very distinct skills, and
Yes.
that we couldn't really do each other's, you know, talents or whatever. And it's true for everybody. And one of the things that's I find
Yeah.
really interesting is that process of, you know, post awakening. There is a tendency for skills to come online and circumstances and so on to be organized so that a very specific expression comes out. Um, like Eva becoming a healer, you know, and me
Yeah.
writing. I mean, it's like writing. That was not something I thought I had any skill at, and it just started. I just started writing after I woke up, well, around the time I woke up, it started, but after I woke up, it really started to flow. I basically, one of the ways I integrated after I woke up was writing a book, basically doing a knowledge dump. I spent 6 months full time just writing, and then afterwards I realized it wasn't really fit for publication. It was just a big knowledge dump. Each chapter could have made a book. It had to be filled out a lot more, and so the first book, it was one of the chapters, and I got 2 more written that I'm working through the whole process with editing and page layout and all that stuff that's needed. Yeah, it's an epic job you can kind of throw up a Word document into Kindle and an ebook, but to do a proper book, it's a major process.
Yeah, I'm sure the two of you know, because you've written books. I'm in the process.
I've got
David,
I've got an article on my other blog that talks about the steps, all the little bits and pieces you have to take care of, and the
to write a book?
Yeah.
Oh, good. I'm gonna look into this.
Yeah.
Very
How's that
helpful.
book going, Eva? Eva's like, I'm gonna get it done over Christmas.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Well, at least at the draft, but it didn't happen, unfortunately. But I'm on it.
Yeah,
Actually, yeah.
One of the things too is when you're writing on this level too, it's like a flow thing, and so sometimes it happens and sometimes it doesn't, and you can't really control that process. So
Yeah.
you just have to allow it to unfold when it unfolds. I really wanted my book to be finished in time for my first gap interview, but it was about 2 years later I got it done.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's really about tapping into the memories. That's not always easy, to actually tap into the memories and then word them again, like you have to be in a, I don't know, it had like you say, it has to be a certain flow of being able to tap into old memories and to share them again, because they're not like available at the moment, for example. They're just not available. So really there has to be.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like
it's
kind of a 2-step thing too, because the first step is basically capturing that flow of understanding that cosmic memory value and flowing it out into words. And then the second step is going through that editing process and polishing it and integrating it in with the other flows. And so it all kind of flows as a whole. But it's interesting too, that attention to detail, that attention, that focus on the words kind of puts some of that presence into the words. And so then it translates into the book. It's not certainly not as strong as in effect as in person or online conversations, but it's there.
I definitely noticed this with some books. There is a transmission in them, so definitely, yeah. Or the presence, yeah.
There wasn't an intention to do that with my book, but that's kind of how it worked out.
Nice. Actually, I have a question back to the refinement stage of unity consciousness. Can you talk about this a little bit more, and also the refinement of the Brahman? So let's start with unity. So how does it unfold, and what can happen in that refinement state?
Well, it kind of depends, but basically, with a full unity process, what you're unfolding is not just, you've awoken in consciousness and there's your usual surface level of experience, but then there's all these layers in between them. That process by which consciousness comes out of itself and expresses into form. There's kind of these stages of development that it goes through. And so some of that can unfold with God consciousness, but refined unity goes into a lot more detail. And that's where you get to know the sort of like consciousness being aware of itself globally and at every point. And there's certain sort of secondary, well, not secondary, but there's certain other values around that about the way creation becomes. And kind of like, there's what's known as beta, which means knowledge. That kind of relates to cosmic memory, and sort of the knowing the mind of God, so to speak, where the thought of the divine is kind of encoded, I guess as a memory, you could say. And when you put your attention on that memory, the creation can pop out. Now, to be clear here, when I say creation, I'm talking about a structure in which things like in our creation, there's this whole structure which then produces universes. And like the Hiranyagarbha is kind of like seeing, that I mentioned earlier, the golden egg is seeing the universe from the outside. But that's one universe, and there's a whole bunch in our creation. Ours is a kind of a more complex creation. There's other ones that are much simpler. For example, there's one that I looked at one point, which was really, really simple, and it was an embodiment of time. So it became really clear to me what time was from experiencing that. You know, where space comes from consciousness becoming aware of itself. So there's kind of this distinction of subject and object, and there's a space between them. That's kind of like a subtle value of space, and then that manifests forward to become the space itself, what we would call manifest space. So there's that goes on, create the space of creation, which is not manifest, and then into a manifest space, whereas time is from the process of experience, the dynamic between subject and object. There's a process of experience that takes place in there, and our relationship with that process of experience creates our experience of time. So we can, that way, you know, we can shift around. I think there's like 7 different ways. I did a blog article about it. But for example, we may experience time as only now, or we may experience time in the usual linear way that most people do, or we may experience time as all the past and present, all in the now, or we may experience time as eternal, and so forth. You know, and it's just shifting our relationship with time. And we can see that just even in our daily life. You know, we're sitting in a waiting room waiting for an appointment, and the doctor's late.
Slows down.
You know, yeah, it's like time seems to go to move, and then, you know, when we're absorbed in something we really enjoy, and then time just seems to push on by, and it's just our relationship with time has shifted, and so we're experiencing it differently.
Like in meditation, it can pass really, really quickly.
Yeah.
Like an hour feels like 10 minutes.
Timeless. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And in Brahman, is it the same in Brahman, just around the Brahman, or?
Oh, with Brahman is quite different because there's not content. Because in consciousness is aware of itself, and the process of experience is creating experiences. And so creation through the universes into our individual form, the whole thing, it's all experiences. It's all content in consciousness. But if you go prior to consciousness, that process of experience isn't there. There's no content. And so refinement in Brahman is kind of like a oxymoron in a certain way. And yet there is a process that takes place where, as I mentioned earlier, we shift from, first we notice what's lost, but then as we settle deeper into the knowingness of Brahman, we start to become aware of what Brahman actually is. And there's a gradual kind of knowing. And then qualities begin to become apparent, like I mentioned earlier, about the alertness and the liveliness, and which is essentially the Shiva and the Shakti values that are in an unmanifest form, but essentially that liveliness stirs alertness and it becomes conscious, and then it stirs it some more and it starts to flow, and then it curves back on itself and becomes self-aware. And behind that is a quality of intelligence, though. So the liveliness isn't just agitating the alertness, but it's enlivening it in a smooth and effective way, and so then you get so in that dynamic of observer, observed, and process of experience, you also get those qualities that are dominant: the alertness and the observed, the liveliness in the alertness in the observer, liveliness in the observed, and the intelligence in that process of experience. And that's where the process of experience is where the Davidya value is active, the laws of nature that are creating experience, and creating this experience of life, so that we have certain experiences and unfold, kind of go out into this grand process of going out into the field of experience, experiencing the world, and then coming back home to who we are within, in the grand evolutionary cycle.
Okay. Very interesting. You just talked about the devatas. Yeah, Gareth and me, we were talking about this before, that we're both interested in knowing more about this. I mean, you said a law of nature, but can you describe it just a bit so that it's easier to understand?
Yeah,
What does it mean exactly?
It's kind of a complicated field because it's, well, firstly, there's what's called what I refer to as the personal and the impersonal ways of seeing. Essentially, the impersonal is the abstract, the intellect. It's kind of the scientific approach to see the world as processes and functions. You know, it's kind of the more analytical approach, the masculine approach in some ways, and it's basically seeing the world in a kind of more neutral way, we could say. And then the personal is when we experience the same world through the perspective of the heart, and that's personalized more. There's the feeling values are brought along, and those same laws of nature are experienced or can be experienced with forms, or we experience the laws of nature in forms. So, you know, for example, we're strolling in the forest and we can experience the trees. We can experience how the trees are feeling, what their relationship is with other trees around them, and how they feel about, you know, whatever. And then we can experience the devas that are responsible for, deva just means light being, that are responsible for that species of tree in that area. You know, that's a kind of a laws of, that's a sort of
So are they like a guardian of such, like little beings who like inhabit like the forest, like a
yeah, and you know, if you got a garden, then there'll be devas for those for the specific plants and stuff.
Could people refer to them as like fairies? Or
Yeah, like that. But
okay,
the trick is with the personal, it's like it uses the tool of what you might call imagination. It's coming through your personal filter, and they're taking a form that, well, you know, a classic example is angels. You know, when you experience those kind of beings, and you're brought up in the West, you're likely to see angels as having wings and flowing robes. What they are essentially is clouds of intelligence. But when we personalize them, we see them through our expectations and you know, cultural programming and that kind of stuff. And so they show up a certain way. You know, when somebody experiences a Hindu god, you know, they're going to experience them in a certain way. Tend to. I mean, there's lots of variation, but they'll tend to experience them based on their cultural expectations. So it's kind of really pliable, and the key with that stuff is not about the appearances, because the tricky part, of course, is you get sort of like more astral type beings that are, some of which you know, have agendas or whatever, and they can create an appearance that seems pleasing, but they're actually their motivations are not so good. So you have to kind of pay attention to the feeling value. That's the important part there. So you don't get, if you start experiencing this stuff, you don't get misled. So you have to kind of be careful with that whole territory, and be sure that you're actually relating to a divine type being, you know, an angel or some such, and not something less desirable. And it's not, you know, there's not, I wouldn't consider that a goal or something, you know, you really want to have or whatever like that. It's just, it's something that does develop naturally with spiritual development for a lot of people.
So what's your relationship to them, David? Like, what, how do they show up for you? Do you have like, do they converse with you? Do they tell you things? Do
Well,
they guide
for me,
you?
their advantage is like you can perceive laws of nature, you know, with the impersonal mode. But if you in the personal mode, you can actually have a conversation with them. I mean, an example I use sometimes is I was on a flight one time, and the wind was having a lot of fun, and it was really like a roller coaster. The plane was kind of going up and down in a crazy way, and so I tuned into the wind devas that were around us and asked them to, you know, move off. and they were kind of like, oh, just following our orders. And so then I kind of went up the hierarchy and I asked their managers or whatever, and they said, oh yeah, sure, fine, and you know, with respect, and then they moved off and the plane settled out. So I mean, it has those kind of things. A friend of mine had a problem with too many birds in his backyard, and he kind of did a thing with them, similar. We're
So
talking supervisory structure, but most of the time, I mean, there's life everywhere, of forms of
yeah.
life all over the place. But most of the time I don't pay any attention to that because it's just too much information, and it can be really distracting, because you still have to do your daily stuff. And, you know, I mean, even things like bookcases and you know, pieces of furniture have related laws of nature. But but human-made stuff tends to be stupider, but
So you kind of,
it's interesting.
you know that they're there, you know, you
Yeah.
can talk to them or get from them whatever you want when
Yeah.
when you want, but like
Yeah.
other than that, there is no experience of them.
Yeah, I just
Yeah.
kind of I tuned it out. Some people have developed you know, developed more of a relationship with them because they use them with healing or something like that. Well, with certain ones, but yeah.
So David, in my shift into unity, right, it felt like everything opened up, right? The good and the bad. And I could sense everything. So I could walk into a house and all of a sudden I'd be like, oh, there's a presence here. I can feel it. And
Yeah.
I would feel everything as vibration. And like I had, for instance, it's like with dead people coming to me, trying to connect with me, so I would contact their loved ones and relay messages to them, and that happened 2 or 3 times. And I
Yeah.
actually have one thing, I got it on camera where I actually let one of them, and because I knew who he was, he had passed on, and I let him kind of sit into my body, and I asked him questions, and he would move my head, and so I recorded the whole thing on my
Yeah. You have to be
phone.
really
But there
careful
was
with
an
that kind of stuff, though. But yeah,
yeah. But then there
because
was
when
another
you let
time.
something take over your body, it reduces the integration, body, mind, spirit kind of integration, because you're letting someone else step in there. So you have to be really careful with that.
Yeah, it kind of felt like a stepping in, but I knew
Yeah.
who he was, right? He was family.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I also woke up one evening and I had these little three um intelligences floating beside me, right? And I could
Yeah.
sense, I couldn't see them, but I could sense that they were so high
Okay.
and they were mischievous, right? And they announced themselves as bell fairies. And they weren't harmful, but they weren't nice at the same time either, right? And I
Yeah.
just kind of
Yeah.
said, no, I don't want to get interested. You know,
Yeah. Yeah. No,
come
that's
back another time.
yeah. The laws of nature that are associated with the elements and the fundamental things like water and air and some of that nature stuff, that they tend to have attitude towards humans because we tend to
Yeah,
ignore and destroy their work, and you know, that kind of stuff. We're kind of, they see us as kind of ignorant because we don't, you know, people don't see them, and so they don't know that, you know, they kind of just blunder in and wreck whatever. And so they tend to have attitude about them, and they can be very mischievous. I remember one
but I
time a friend of mine bought a property in a new subdivision, and it was on a quite a rocky, a steep slope, and they had the properties were kind of tiered. Um, but the devas of the property, and this is one thing I find really interesting, because property is just an abstract thing. It's just a concept. There's no real, you know, there's a line on the ground is virtual, you know, and you kind of have a property map. And yet when you create a property in your mind, well, you know, conceptually, there's a deva of the property. And so when you're going to then build on that property, um, you know, basically the devas of that area were really, they had a lot of attitude. You know, I knew right away people were going to have a lot of trouble building on those sites because there were, unless they kind of worked with the devas a little bit. So there's kind of things like that you see, but and you know, the building itself will have a deva, and you know, all these different things. And so some people, you know, work with stuff like that, but yeah, it's something you really need to be sure you're experiencing what you think you're experiencing, and
yeah.
be really
So it
clear
all
on
stopped for me then.
stuff.
Once I shifted into Brahman, all of that went away. My ability to communicate with entities,
Oh yeah,
astral, all of that disappeared completely, like just
interesting.
gone.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, for
So
me,
what
it
happens?
shifted from being sort of, you know, the expression of reality into, with the Brahman shift, it was all then seen as an appearance. So the
Yeah.
world is an appearance. It's not an appearance that's an illusion in the sense of, you know, the common way Maya is translated, but it was an appearance that has a purpose and a function. But it's not real in and of itself. It's an expression of reality, but it's not real in itself. And that became very strong after the Brahman shift. But the experiential values didn't go away. The relationship for me, the big one was the relationship with the form of God I most related to, that I had a relationship with, that ended. With the Brahman shift, because they were still an expression of consciousness in that kind of way.
Okay. Can
But
I ask a
it's not
question?
still there. Mhm.
So can I ask a question on that
Yeah,
personal version of God, right? Because I had an experience of connecting with Krishna. Okay, he
yes,
turned up in one of my, I was reciting a mantra one day, and he was there, and he was stretching, and he was full of love, and he had a distinct signature, right, that I could feel.
yeah,
And then I had this other experience where I merged with, like, you know, the that we spoke about it with Dorothy, the blue pearl, right? Where I got sucked into the blue pearl, and it was this cyan blue sea of consciousness, and I knew it as the mind of God, right? And it had the personal version of Krishna, and that plane of existence. They were the same. They had the same signature.
yeah,
So is that what that is?
yeah. There's a post I've got where I talk about because, you know, like for me, Shiva was one of the forms that showed up, and there was Shiva in form. There was Shiva in what's known as Mahadeva, where it's kind of like a form, but it's kind of like an outline, a kind of ghost form, or, you know, this ghost is the wrong word there, but it's kind of like a virtual form. And then there's Shiva as the underlying law of nature itself, formless, but having certain qualities and influence. And then the article itself was talking about a fourth. I'm blanking on that now, but yeah. So you can experience form or formless version, and they so each law of nature can be experienced in essentially four different ways. But the fourth is, I can't remember now, but it's post Brahman somewhere. You don't experience it before that, I don't think. Um, so yeah, and all those laws of nature can be experienced like that, um, and it's a huge field. Yeah, I don't pay a lot of attention to it here and there. Like I was working with someone who worked with Archangel Michael, and so I worked with him a little bit. But our relationship was very different than hers. Um, and what he encouraged me to, how he encouraged me to be versus how he encouraged her to be, and it was quite interesting that the same person but totally different relationship and totally different expectations. Um, but yeah, I don't pay a lot of attention to that. And in fact, one of the things I've been learning is that um, I tend to just kind of do it myself, kind of thing. And one thing I was learning, if I'm working on some really big stuff, I guess post Brahman, there's been more and more of a shift to collective stuff, and so you know, I've done some work on helping the collective heal or work through stuff, and that's not something I do all the time, but just here and there. And so I kind of do it myself. But a couple of times I've run into circumstances where I was dealing with what are called asuras, which are kind of like high level demons, and they were
Negative
able to,
forces.
yeah, they were basically, what I was doing was trying to clear the management of a large dark structure, and but they used appearances to appear to be what I was trying to deal with, and but it became apparent afterwards that I only deal with the appearances of their appearances, not their actual expression. And so, whereas if I had worked with others more experienced on that level at the time, it would have been more effective. So there's times where it can be effective to work with other kinds of beings, real, or not real, as a manifest or at a subtler level, and different beings have different kinds of skills. For me, there's kind of been this process over a large number of years where different people have shown, or beings have shown up of different kinds, and have supported certain things. One of the things for me was that when I was working through the layers of creation, and this is after I came back from teacher training in the 70s, there was kind of this process. I woke up to I had the cognition of the golden egg thing, and so over time I kind of had more experiences around the way the universe becomes. And then this one day, Krishna shows up, and it's kind of, well, I didn't know it was Krishna at the time, but there was kind of this being that was dancing, playing a flute, and he pointed out a feature in the sky I hadn't noticed before. And when I put my attention on that, the consciousness moved through that, and then outside the universe, the kind of universe is in a space, and moved outside that space of the universe into the lower levels of creation, of the space of creation, and then there was a progressive series of other divine beings that would show up and point out some features that would take me up to the next level until I got up to the top of creation. But that was as far as I could go before I woke up, because you can't go, because before that is the dynamics of consciousness itself, which requires a great deal more refinement and clarity, and so you have to have that stable platform of awakening to the witness. I was witnessing, so there was some of that there, but there was still ego and those kind of dynamics that were distracting it.
Yeah, it's funny because I went through a phase before I woke up that I could astral travel and I could have out-of-body experiences, and there was still loads of ego. There was no awakening, no witnessing, and I had the abilities, loads of psychic abilities. So, but it had absolutely nothing to do with awakening, right? It was just more dream, more distraction.
Yeah, exactly. You got to be really careful with that kind of stuff, because it's, you're here in a human form to have a human experience in this human life, and spending your time off other places and stuff tends to reduce that mind-body spirit integration that I talked about before, because you're not here, you're over there. We do some of that stuff in dreaming, and that's fine. That's kind of the role of that. But when you're in waking state, it's generally speaking, it's good to be in waking here.
Yeah.
And certainly there's gazillions of like there's you mentioned astral traveling, there's going off and visiting the fairies or the devas or whatever, and or having long conversations with angels. But most people, that's not their dharma, so not why they're here. So
And
just,
David, you talk about Soma as kind of being like in behind the refined perceptions, right? It seems to be something that happens as we awaken, but some people don't have any experience, or they don't know about it, or
yeah.
can you give us a little bit about Soma?
Okay, so basically, up top of creation area, there is uh, a white ocean, essentially. The Puranas talked about churning the ocean with the sort of the story about all the devas and the demons get together and they churn the ocean to get the Soma out. But basically, it's in a raw form that can't be used by subtle beings or whatever. However, humans have the physiological mechanism to refine Soma. And so essentially, when we transcend, when we go into samadhi during meditation and such, we kind of dip into that, and the Soma is filtered up through the brain down, and and it kind of comes out at there's a subtle gland, it's not non-physical, subtle gland up at the back of the throat, and it kind of drips down through there, and sometimes we can get a sweet taste in the mouth. That's how most people notice it. But generally we swallow it and it goes down into digestion, and then from there it's sent out around the body, and it feeds the devas of the body. It's kind of like well, they call it the nectar of immortality. It's also called amrita, but it's basically this very refined substance. And the body has to kind of be in a certain place for it to be effective, because if there's too much fire, for example, it'll burn it. And and there's too much tamas, it's just the process doesn't work properly. So as we kind of shift, these are the three gunas of tamas is essentially inertia, rajas is fire or transformation, and then sattva is purity and clarity. And so one of the processes of spiritual practices is to transform tamas to sattva through the process of transformation through fire. But fire can burn as well as transform. So there's kind of, it's about balance and kind of this process of gradual shifting in the dominant guna in our physiology. And when there's the sattva helps support the soma process, and then the soma feeds the devas, and it helps to refine perception and allow the awakening heart and that whole refinement process.
And the physiology as well, David? The physical form benefits from it?
Yes, yeah. And so basically there's the kind of the God consciousness, the refined unity and refined Brahman, para-Brahman process is greatly enhanced by that. Now, it kind of depends on our dominant sense. I mean, I use visual words and talk about visual experiences because I'm visually oriented the way that's the natural law here. But different people have different orientations there. Some are more somatic feel, and some are more sound and, you know, hearing, vibration, that kind of thing. And it kind of depends, but that doesn't mean they're not having the experience. It just means it's coming through a different sensory pathway, and actually, you know, sound and feel are more subtle than sight. So, I mean, it's easier to give words to sight, but
and David, is it something necessary to have for the
Soma?
process? Yeah.
Well, if there's going to be a God consciousness, refined unity, and para-Brahman kind of process, then yeah, it is needed. But not everybody has that. Some people terminate at Brahman, and some people sit in Brahman for a while, and then the refinement goes on very gradually, and then they start having the deeper stuff after that. It really varies. Some people start the process well before, because just through the process of meditation and samadhi, they're getting that soma, and so their perception is refining. You know, like for me, the fancy experiences
David,
start pretty quickly.
So for me, samadhi was like a process that was going on, right? It came in, it was transforming my system, right? And I was experiencing soma. I was getting that sweet taste and at one stage it was almost choking. It was like coming all the time. It felt like it was almost choking me. I'd be sat talking to friends, and I'd be like, I kept having to clear my throat with this sweet taste. And then once I got to the samadhi stopped, and I went into Brahman, and then I just don't experience the soma anymore, or at least I don't know I'm experiencing it. I just
Are you meditating?
well, I don't. There is no need to meditate like anymore.
Okay,
But
yeah.
when I'm working with people, I sit in
Yeah.
sessions with people or my group. But
Okay.
meditation is not what it used to be.
Right. No, it's not. Yeah. For me now, I still meditate, but it's sort of like, I'm not transcending. I mean, for one thing, there's no way to
Yeah,
transcend to, you're already there.
you're there.
But then later on in the process, basically, I drop the world for a while. And I have no idea how long I'm going to be gone, kind of thing. It just disappear for a while, and then I come back and I do my day, and, you know, whatever. I still find value in it. That's partly though my own physiology and stuff. It's soothing and stuff, and it's good for my body. So I still do it, but it's a completely different thing now. than it was.
Yeah, I just experienced, because all day long there is energies flowing, there is light coming in, because of me and also Gareth, right? We're working with people. And then when I sit, it has no effect, like it doesn't do anything. It's just nice to have a rest or to chill a little bit, or, in that kind of way. But yeah,
I don't work with
that's
people
why
like
I
that.
don't really.
Yeah, I don't work with people like that. I mean, I do
Yeah.
coaching, where, helping people answer their questions about where they're at and what's going on, whatever. But not, I don't do energy work and Shaktipat, those kind of things. And so, I'm writing. So maybe that's the difference too, because I'm not working with this stuff all the time. Although it's showing up here and there in various ways. And like I don't culture energy healing or working with dead people or whatever, but stuff just shows up every so often and presents itself.
Yeah, and actually, this is a question I also had, because for everybody who is then in Brahman and Para Brahman, that the abilities or what they feel drawn to do is different, right? So you are drawn to the writing, we're working with the energies. And I don't know, like, because I don't know many people who are in these states, and I just thought, if you are in Para Brahman and these lights just started to come in, that you're a channel for divine forces. This is just my understanding, because it's my experience and also Gareth's.
Yeah, keeping in mind though, not everybody has a dharma to be of service directly like that. Like I know someone in Parabrahman, for example, that they just quietly help individuals here and there as it comes up. They don't have a role, they don't have a website or anything like that. They're kind of unknown outside the small circle of people.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people like that. I mean, there's a kind of prevalent concept that if you're awake, then you should be teaching. No, that's teaching is a skill. And for some people that comes online with the process, or they're already a teacher and it kind of shifts form or it evolves as they do. But that's a small percent. Most people awake are just living their life as before, but from a different place.
Still having a positive effect on the collective.
Effect. Oh yeah, it's huge. I mean, I remember, going on courses back in the 70s, and it's just like slogging through all the collective stuff. Just there was so much. I mean, before my course, the course before mine, the place where we were for 3 months, actually turned out to be the headquarters for the Nazis during the Second World War. And the first course that was there, they had all kinds of experiences and clearing going on to clear the building, basically. And then when we came, it was nice and clear, so we could step in and enjoy that. But there's all kinds of examples of that where just clearing the space. And you go to a in-person retreat, so you go to a facility, if it's the first time it's been used, there's more stuff to clear. And then if it's something that's used regularly for a while, then it kind of gets a vibe, so to speak. I mean, classically, there's famous places that people go on pilgrimages to where someone very awake lived, and just their presence there, or where Buddha sat under the tree, this kind of thing. There's kind of a presence that the area takes on. It kind of becomes a blessed space, and you get objects that are used in ceremony effectively, because there's certainly, you can do lots of ritual that it's all mind and doesn't really do that, but someone who goes deeper and expresses from the heart and so on, their objects can get blessed that way and so on too.
Yeah, but that's very interesting, because I'm working with people and they progress, and then they feel like, okay, because they're progressing, and then eventually they go into a higher state, they will do something similar Gareth and me are doing, right? And it's just good to know for them as well that it doesn't have to be like that, or it can be totally different direction as well. So that's really, very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a thing called naughty leaves that are written by these sages thousands of years ago, and when I got my
we
naughty
did it.
We got it too.
We followed you when you did it, and then a whole group of us did it. So yes.
Yeah. Anyways, mine said that if I don't write, the flow of knowledge will stop. So it's sort of like it's
Okay.
it's basically, you know, for me, the writing is just part of what I'm supposed to be doing. And
Okay.
Yeah, it was a Canadian girl, right?
yeah, Vera,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah. We
Yeah.
we did it as well. Yeah. So we've been kind of following you for a while, David.
I mean, I have to say,
David,
it wasn't so, just about the palm leaf, it wasn't so accurate about the awakening stuff. So then I kind of dismissed it. You know, I was like, I'm not believing this because it just, when the awakening happened and when it's supposed to happen, kind of, there was a different time or different age named in,
Yeah.
said in the palm leaf. So that wasn't
Oh, that's
true. And then
interesting.
I was like, I'm going to dismiss that.
Yeah, that's interesting because most of the palm leaves don't say when; they just say that it's going to
Yeah,
be.
okay.
Mm.
In ours, there was actually the age. Yeah, the age
Yeah.
was in there.
Well,
Yeah.
Vera talks about that a little bit too, because it's basically there's still free will, and so
Yeah.
sometimes there's possibility, and
Mm.
there's several things that were possibilities that haven't happened. But then for me, there's been a few things that have happened that I thought were extremely unlikely. You know, there's a set of things in there. But you know, one of the really obvious ones though is they said that that my family had a curse, and it would be good to do a fire ceremony. So I had that done, and it shifted the gender of all the kids that have been born in my family since, because they're basically all being born as boys, and they're now all being born as girls, kind of correcting the balance there.
Fascinating.
Interesting.
So yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah, I mean, how I understood it, it's basically this is the possibility, and you kind of choose whenever it comes in for you. Yeah. In
yeah,
that kind of way, but not like exactly the times when it said things will happen on the palm leaf. That's just the
yeah,
possibility, but you
some yeah,
can choose that it happens earlier or later or whatever. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
My granddaughter was born 3 or 4 months before the period in which she was supposed to be born, you know, in the palm leaf. So there's little
Okay.
variations like that, and but if you're considering they were written thousands of years ago, it's
Yeah.
pretty astonishing that any of it's accurate at all. But it's just interesting because
Yeah.
it's just this you know, to have one of the Saptarishis, these ancient seers, to have a look at your life and give you some advice is it's
Mm.
really nice.
Yeah.
David, I have one question, right? That Eva just brushed on very briefly earlier on, right? The descent of Shakti into the heart, right? So Shakti rises, it merges with Shiva in the crown, and then there's a descent back down through the Amrita channel, okay? And with that, it takes the mind with it. You wrote about this in the book, right? Is that the dissolving of the I thought when it drops back down and pulls the mind into the heart?
Yeah, the way you talk about it is a little different than I do. I frame it more in relationship to the head, heart, gut
Yeah.
process, and it's essentially it's like on the blog I used to write about it as the three amigos,
Mm.
egos. It's kind of the three layers of identification, the three eyes, the sort of thing, the personal, and that also relate to the three Mahamarmas in that system. But it's essentially three levels of identification. There's kind of the thinking, the ideas of a me, and that is generally released with the first shift, awakening, and then processed afterwards. Like one of the things that often happens after you wake up is that there's these stories that the mind pops up, and you know, this circumstance happens, the mind pops up the story, and then you look at it and realize, oh, this is really stupid. Why am I thinking that? And then you kind of see through it, and then it falls away and it stops doing that. But the energetic driver of that is on the level of the heart. And so there can still be a tendency for those things to show up here and there because there's still a deeper driver and the heart level, the emotional drive, the energy drivers of that in the heart. And so the heart level is when we clear the heart me, you could say the heart identification. And then the gut is called the core or existential identity. Um, and then generally speaking, you know, the sort of the model that Adyashanti, for example, talks about
The
is
barbecue.
you have the shift, the first shift with awakening, the second shift with the heart release with the God consciousness shift, and then the barbecue or the whatever for the unity shift. But you know, there's lots of examples of people that you know, I know people in Brahman that have not had the heart opening yet, and so they haven't got to the core identity yet. And then people that have had the heart opening but not yet the core identity. So I mean, it's nice if they happen that way. You know, I know someone
So
who
it's not linear.
yeah. Well, it's linear, but it's not synced to the stages necessarily. I mean, it was for me, but it isn't for everybody. And yeah, then there's the barbecue, which is basically it's called that because it's the third chakra there, in the solar plexus. It's the fire chakra, so it has that quality of being roasted. And generally speaking, people aren't aware of this identification until you get close to it. But it's just this core, you know, for me that when it happened, the sense of David disappeared. And I stopped using personal pronouns for a couple of weeks. They didn't make any sense. But then I kind of integrated better, and you know, you can't really talk that way. It's like when I wrote that book, my editor was saying, "No, you can't use here as a personal pronoun." But but yeah, for me, there was a couple of things that happened like that. There was kind of this dissolving of the sense of inside and outside, and then there was that roasting, and actually I might not have even noticed it, except for the fact that I'd watched that I mentioned earlier about the Adyashanti and Locke Kelly having this conversation called Journey After Awakening, and they talk about the process between awakening and unity, and I was basically just before that, and so I knew there was that one step, and so it was just this really weird kind of really strong kind of dark thought came up, which was unusual at that point, and then there was a kind of a sense of smoke, like it got roasted, and then that set the stage and then I went on a retreat and had a unity shift a few days later. Can't remember. For a while.
So David, I wrote about in my book having a second Kundalini awakening that was almost like a ball of fire that rose up to the third chakra and then stopped. Could that have been the roasting of the gut?
Well, it's not so much the way it's experienced, it's more the effect it has. So, like, did you find a loss of the sense of I in that process?
It all came around at the same time, right? So I had the vision.
Yeah, it's probably the way you experienced it. I mean,
of the eye dropping back into the heart.
Yeah, I mean, Adyashanti talked about having 2 weeks of kind of sweating with fear and just a lot of stuff came up. I had much less, although what I've found since, it's like I'm always finding more junk in the third chakra to clear out. I think, oh, it's all I've gone in there, and like I kind of look inside and I can go in there and clean it all out, and everything's nice and sparkly, and then something else comes up on the surface, because the thing is, creation is nested. You know, you have consciousness aware of itself, in which creation starts, and then within that is a space in which a universe starts, and then, you know, and everything kind of arises with its own little space. Every pan, this glass, everything has its own kind of space in which that form is expressed, and so it's all spaces within spaces, and time within time, kind of layers like that, and yeah, of course, now I've lost the point of what I was saying that, but
you're saying that clearing is never ending.
Oh yeah, it's never ending. So there's going to be the stuff that we've repressed, put into its own little space in there, and it's not clear to us, and then it starts to surface, and then so my nice pristine gut is something else shows up there. Yeah.
And actually, I have a question, Kundalini related, because I had a session with somebody today who was in contact with you already, like via email, who he knows you very well. And he said, I should ask you a question. So is the Kundalini rising to the brain necessary for then going into higher states like Brahman, Brahman, and so on? Like, how important is the Kundalini for these higher states?
Okay. One of the things I think it's important to say is Kundalini is part of the process, but it's not causal. Kundalini doesn't create an awakening, it supports it. It's like the energetic
Part of
structure.
it.
It's going through the process. Because there's this kind of idea in some of the Kundalini yoga traditions that you want to push the Kundalini and get it up there and create the awakening and that. But that can
That's
cause
wrong.
that can
Yeah.
cause a lot of roughness and because it really, it basically is blasting into things that aren't maybe ready yet that haven't been softened enough yet to clear. So essentially there's this process and there's a tradition called Kundalini Vidya, and she's retired now, but she wrote
I
a
have the
book.
book. I have the
Yeah.
book. Yeah.
Yeah, and it kind of the framing is some of that is kind of along the same lines. I don't agree with some of her approach, but she does talk about Kundalini process in a lot of detail that you don't see elsewhere. And one of the things she mentions in there is that mantra meditators, she's the one that I learned about makra from, because I'd had the experience, but I didn't know what it was. It was something that had happened. The one with, asanas on the floor and the white flash and that. And the but they talk about one of the things that mantra meditators often don't notice much about Kundalini. Just there's a process that they're purifying, and the Kundalini just gradually goes up and that. And when it hits makra, it stops going up and down, which is why you get the witness can be ongoing prior to awakening. It's very short distance between makra and bindu and the shift, but sometimes it pauses there to help clear out the rest of the system. I mean, I'd only been meditating for less than a year at that point. So it was a little early for awakening to be a smooth and stable thing. So it kind of sat there for a long time. And so that process is necessary, but we may not notice much of it. Some people have a much more active process and they notice more things, or they'll notice they'll notice a chakra. But keeping in mind, your body has over 10,000 channels and subchakras and all kinds of other stuff, and where there's blockages and that kind of stuff, it's all over the place. And so you can have all kinds of sensations of clearing here and there, over there, or whatever like that. And it's not always apparent if it's in the chakra or a subchakra or a nadi over here, one of the channels, or whatever. And it's just a process, and you kind of go through it at a certain point, and then at some point when it's time, you wake up. The thing about awakening too is it's not you that wakes up. You wake up from from the me into your higher nature, and it's not something you control or manage. It happens when it's best for the whole. And so the however you want to look at it, consciousness, divine, or whatever, is kind of managing this process of purifying the collective, awakening, and then supporting a progressively higher state of consciousness, but doing it gradually so we don't implode and by going too fast. Because right now, one of the things you're seeing in the collective is a lot of people have woken up, and it's lifted the collective consciousness. So it's lifted all boats. Everybody's been brought along with that. So what it's doing is it's bringing stuff to the surface that people haven't dealt with yet, and they don't understand necessarily. They don't understand how to process stuff, so they try and repress it. But it's not wanting to be repressed. It's pushing to the surface, and so essentially they're acting out. And so you see a lot of that going on in society these days. A lot of people not handling what's surfacing very well, and so there's just some crazy making going on. But it's just part of the process, and it's being remarkably well managed, and so that it never goes too far, kind of thing. And of course, it depends on how you're relating to it, but it's but the key there is that it's a process that happens when it's time. And sometimes people come to the edge of awakening and they step back, and they don't. The step is available for them, but they don't make the step, and so then the opportunity can be given to somebody else.
If fear, David, would you say it's fear gets in the way?
Yeah, and the ego is still a
Yeah.
little bit too present there. And you know what?
Yeah.
And sometimes people will wake up with the catalyst directly, with the teacher there or whatever. And sometimes they'll wake up, reading a book, a related book or something, and whatever. Lorn woke up watching a video of a spiritual teacher, but he got up to turn it off because he was not impressed. So And then he woke
I
That's
woke up
interesting.
in the gym, going to the gym one morning for a workout.
yeah, you never know
Yeah,
you never know
yeah.
what will happen. You know, there's a guy I know, he woke up, he was walking down the sidewalk and a car horn went off and it just kind of popped him out.
That's so funny. Yeah, but
Uh,
that's just I like just sorry very quickly. I like
no, you're okay.
that you shared that it's a gradual process and the Kundalini is just part of it, and people might not even notice because the clearing is happening
Yeah,
anyways. Because there are people who are kind of focusing on that, you know, oh, this has to happen first, and then the next thing, and the next thing.
Yeah,
And I
yeah,
just like about your work and how you describe things that everybody's very different. Different things can unfold at different times. Because I think that's so important for people to know that they don't
yeah,
fixate on things because then they're blocking themselves. So
yeah.
yeah, that's what I really like. Yeah.
It's one of the issues why some teachers don't put out books and things like my book is if people get these concepts and so I get these people writing to me asking if they're in para-Brahman when they haven't woken up yet, and it just you get this kind of concepts
I
about
get
how
it
it's
too,
supposed
David.
to be.
I get it too.
Yeah. And you get these
Yeah,
concepts about how it's supposed to be, and it's supposed to unfold like this and this, like, and they're waiting for God consciousness to show up after they woke up because that's what's supposed to happen.
Mm.
Yeah, another thing I've noticed that I've talked to people through a few times is that if they have a flashier awakening, there's more kind of experiences and content, and it's not unusual for people to have purification with awakening too. So people can be laughing and crying at the same time, when they shift. Um, but the key is that's not what woke up. It's not the flashy stuff that might have happened, and lots of people have very quiet shifts too, but if it does happen, and so people can get distracted by the content, not recognizing it's not the content, it's the experiencer that's woken up, and
would you
so
say
it's
the
really
flashiness is the signpost, David? It's
no,
just a
no, no, it's
signpost to
not.
have.
It's just a side effect of the process.
Mm.
And so people think
Okay,
Yeah.
flashiness. So they look for more
Mm.
flashiness to make progress when that's not what drove the bus. It was just a side effect. So it's really important to understand
okay.
what it is that woke up, so that you put your attention on their presence and not on the content, the experiences.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Definitely. Mm.
And then just one final thing. You said Brahman, not everyone makes this shift. Why is that, David, in the book?
Well, just like we touched on, people can come right to the edge of it, and then it's like I'm not willing to let go of this intimacy and this wholeness of unity. It's a big change, and so some people aren't willing to, they kind of sit at the door. I know a couple of friends um, who kind of came through the door, stepped back, and came to the door, and they start to get feel
Yeah,
for it. It was, "Ooh," and they kind of vacillated. I know one guy who's been over a year who's been sitting on the fence. Um, but generally speaking, if they understand the potential, generally speaking, they eventually they let go enough and make the shift. But
Mm.
But the issue is that, people don't have that background. They don't know that there's something better in that process. Then they may not make that shift. And some people don't even move past awakening. They kind of they get there, and that's good enough for them. And they go on and live their lives in a much more comfortable place. And you know that's fine. Whatever
mm,
whatever's process that people have.
Yeah, so I see this as well in my healing sessions. So some people come and they say, okay, they want to make the next shift, and I should kind of look for them what's in the way, like go shifting to Brahman, having the next step from unity. And it's always them, of course, it's them like holding themselves back in a way, not wanting to let go of certain things. That's always that's what's in a way, and fear. But mostly like they don't want to let go of certain things. So that's the biggest holding. Yeah,
Yeah, and one,
experience
one of
that.
the challenges with someone who's studied these topics and stuff is they've developed concepts about what it's supposed to be like. And that's another thing I've noticed with a lot of people is when they actually wake up in the first place, it's never what they thought it was, because
Yeah.
it's not a concept. It's not the mind that wakes up. It's the self that wakes up. And so we have these ideas about it. For me, I had to kind of toss it all out and then bring it back again in that new context. And again, with the unity shift, again, tossing it out and bringing it back in a new context, because the whole context shifts. So it's, yeah, for some people, there's kind of this idea of a last stress, a last barrier to a shift. And for some people, that barrier is a concept about what it's supposed to be like.
Mm.
And if that doesn't match what it is, and it's not going to because it's not a concept, then it can be an actual barrier.
Yeah.
But you know, generally speaking, there's some bit of I in there that's wanting to control the process. You know, sneaky little thing. I want to have it this way, and it will be nice and tidy, and it will go like this and this. And I wanted to deal with my stuff.
Yeah, totally
Yeah,
agree.
and Brahman is definitely not that, right? It's nothing we could ever imagine.
Yeah, no, it's so divorced from the mind. It's like, yeah, it just shuts the mind down.
Yeah, one of the things I get people, they go, I think I'm in Brahman, you know, and I'm like, if you think you're in Brahman and you have to ask me if you're in Brahman, you're not in Brahman.
Yeah, it's funny. I remember uh, I got outed after I woke up. I wasn't sure about talking about it at first, but a friend of mine unintentionally outed me, and so at the time I had people coming over to my place to listen to Lorn's weekly calls, and um, and so I got outed just beforehand. So people showed up and wanted to ask me questions about it. Um, and then somebody said in the group said, "Well, anybody who says they're enlightened isn't." And that kind of goes back to this thing that Yogananda once said to a reporter: "If you say you're enlightened, then you're not," kind of thing. And the key to understand about that is it's not the I again. It's not the I that wakes up. You wake up from the I, and so it's not the I that gets enlightened.
Yeah.
But if there's an actual shift here, then not talking about, well, I mean, you got to be, it's good to get it established in it so you're comfortable talking about it. Um, but yes, but soapboxing is not a great idea because again, that's kind of a marker for an eye getting involved in there.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it's more yeah, just so the right context, not going around, telling all your friends how important you are now or whatever. It's, yeah, I get some people sometimes, even friends, who kind of, oh, you're so special, and it's like, oh,
It's the
it's
complete opposite of special, right?
yeah,
It's so
yeah,
not special.
yeah, and yeah, because it's not about me or this appearance or any of that stuff. It's what's going on well behind that.
It's so
Yeah,
funny. It's more ordinary than anything I've experienced before ever.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
and just natural. That's how we of being.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's yeah.
And your life becomes so I could just stay here in this room all day, potter around, do lists, open up my computer, and there's no flashiness, there's no,
Right.
excitement. But I'm just so content, just being by myself, doing little chores, and so ordinary, so normal.
Chop wood, carry water. Yeah,
Yeah.
there is the I do I still love exploring, deepening understanding and then I kind of, as that is integrated, I write articles about it and stuff. And that's an interesting dynamic too, because sometimes I write kind of basic articles about dealing with your emotions and then or something like that. And other times I write this kind of highfalutin
Mm.
more advanced
So,
stuff.
so David,
People are trying to figure out what I'm talking about, but
the writings that you post in your blog, right? They're beneficial for helping people to unpack the stages, right? People read them, they get a deeper understanding.
of the on the thing, but there is that natural tendency of the mind to create concepts and wanting, so then we develop a story about how it's supposed to be and that kind of stuff. So it's just good to be alert to that tendency so that you're not carried away by um, your mind, because it's not your mind that's going to do this.
Mm. So we'll put a link as well to your blog, right? Because it's very
Mm.
very helpful. One that just caught just my attention briefly. I think it was the 27 stages of Krishna. Um, what was it now? It was a very recent one. And it was like all these tick marks, you know, to go down to say that you had what was that one called? Krishna's 27 stages of.
I have no idea what you're referring to. Let me just take a quick look here.
It was a very recent one. I think I sent it to Eva.
Yeah, you did.
It was,
It's signs, 27 signs, or at least signs that you're awake
Oh,
or something.
26 qualities of the liberated. Okay,
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
something.
there's a few lists like that I've done. I did one 108 benefits of enlightenment a long time ago, and that was just kind of a bunch of stuff I put there. But
But I thought that was great, David, for people to kind of go in and check themselves against a lot of them
I see your
things you
point.
yeah, you
There
have
is that.
listed.
Yeah, because there is that, and of course, any given person is going to make a slightly different list. Yeah, I totally forgot about this article. But yeah,
I
26
loved it, yeah.
liberated. Yeah, it. Yeah, and some of this stuff has so much misunderstanding around it, like control of the senses, because people think that they have to kind of I have to control my senses, and
Yeah,
I have
it drops away, right?
yeah. Whereas control of the senses comes from we stop identifying with the content, and then with the ego, and then the senses come under the control of the self, and so then they're not we're not being chased around by what the senses are attracted to.
Mm. So that to me would be great for people who are going through an awakening to kind of, if they want to see where they are, they can kind of go in, tick the
Yeah,
boxes. Okay, I'm
yeah.
fine with this one. Okay, I need more work on this one, right?
Yeah, because
Yeah.
there's that shift itself, which is immediate. It's like less than a second. There's almost like it's almost like I've been in a room where several people woke up at the same time, and it's like popcorn going off,
What's
and
that like?
yeah,
Interesting.
it's this little popping, and it whether or not they can sustain it after that though is another matter. But
Okay.
it but that's the shift itself, where we shift to the from being a me to being the cosmic self, the Atman. But it can take time for that to become integrated in the life, and then there'll be a process of quite often there's Adyashanti talks about there's a honeymoon period initially, and then the mind tries to come back up again, and all the junk that we haven't dealt with yet, it's like right there in your face, and it's kind of like a little process of clearing that up, and then you can kind of get into the benefits and that kind of stuff more. So there's a bit of a process with each shift, and also, as I mentioned before, you have these concepts about what it's supposed to be, and then it's not that, so you have to kind of bring back what's relevant and that again. Now, concepts are not an evil thing. It's really useful to have a sense of what's going on and where we're at and in a general way, and what can help the process and that kind of thing. It's just if we get too caught up in the concepts, that's where it's problematic. We have to treat the concepts flexibly as a
Yeah, I mean, concepts are helpful because you know where to go, right? I mean, without a map, how would you know where to go? So it helps, but just
yeah.
with the knowing, okay, then drop it eventually.
Yeah,
Yeah.
not assuming the map is the road. It's
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 a
not the road.
possibility. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, I think we've probably come to the end of our
Yeah.
amazing talk, David and Eva. Yeah,
Yes.
that was great.
That
Thank
was
you very
really good.
much.
Thank you so much
Amazing.
for
So
being on our podcast.
we'll put a link to your book and your blog and your website. And David, you've also kind of started working one-to-one with people, right? Helping them
yeah,
through the stages of awakening.
yeah. I certainly I take email questions and that kind of stuff. But if there people want a bit more of a chat or whatever like that, I do coaching sessions.
And they should definitely read your book, right? I mean, it's like one of the best books out there for navigating your way through these uncharted shifts in consciousness.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I totally
I'm just
agree.
covering the variation because a lot of traditions cover the way their expectations of how it's how their teacher unfolded or whatever like that. There tends to be kind of like that's the way they teach it's supposed to happen. But there's a lot of variation and it doesn't always unfold the way you're teaching. And so the book is basically talks about the more what the underlying process is, and then the common variations on top of that.
Mm.
So yeah. So
Yeah.
it
So
helps.
we'll link to all that. Yeah.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Thank you
Eva.
so
Thank you,
much.
David.
Thank you, Gareth. Thank you, everybody who
Okay.
was listening, or who is listening.
Very
Thank
much.
you.
Okay.